o'clock, so I will call this December 2023 meeting of the Westwood Select Board to order. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, on March 29, 2023, Governor Moore Healy signed into law an act making appropriations for the fiscal year 2023 to provide for supplementing certain existing appropriations and for certain other activities and projects. This act includes an extension until March 31, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions. This December 20, 2023 meeting of the Select Board will be conducted via remote participation by the board. I hereby grant permission to Westwood Media Center to record this meeting and to anyone else who wishes to record the meeting. I am Mary Ann LeBlanc Cummings, the chair of the Select Board. With me are my colleagues, Rob Gotti and Joe Prevotera. Also with us tonight is Christopher Coleman, our town administrator, Nora Loughnane, our director of community and economic development, Tish Healy, executive assistant to the town administrator, and Charlotte Lynch from Westwood Media Center, who is recording the meeting. Thank you very much, Charlotte. With that, I will move right into the chair's update. The New Year's Eve fireworks will be held on December 31st, starting at 7 p.m. at Westwood High School and are proudly sponsored by Roach Brothers. The Select Board would like to thank the Recreation Department staff, the Westwood Fire Department, the Westwood Police Department, and the Westwood Department of Public Works for their time and effort in putting this wonderful event together again for all Westwood residents. Secondly, I want to acknowledge an announcement that was recently made by Hale Education and its executive director, Eric Arnold, which is that Eric will step down as director of Hale as the fourth executive director in August of 2024 after 22 years of service. We want to recognize Eric for his extraordinary contributions to the Westwood community and to wish him well in his next endeavors. With that, I will turn this over to Chris Coleman for the town administrator's report. Chris?
Thank you, Marion. So as a quick power update, we certainly understand that many residents have been without power for hours, days. We've been working very closely with Eversource officials. Eversource officials have informed us there's approximately 200 homes that are still without power. Some of that is also homes that are on lines or circuits where they're going to be de-energizing to reinstall utility poles, rehang wires. So that could also be impacting that, but we've been told by 11 p.m. This evening, the power should be restored. Town officials have been working through with our Eversource liaison to make Westwood a priority. We've had Eversource officials in town for the past 2 days working with them to identify priority areas from a public safety perspective and also to identify additional outages. We know that residents continue to call the Eversource outage 800 number, which is 800-592-2000. When they contact us, we also put that on a list as well and communicate that to our liaisons. We've had teams following Eversource crews around, directing them and directly communicating with them to identify those high priority areas from a public safety perspective. The latest update that we have is again 11 p.m. tonight. There are crews currently working on Dover Road, Magnolia Drive, and Gay Street. I would like to thank the residents for their patience. I know this has been very frustrating and very challenging for some. And I also want to just thank the residents for neighbors helping neighbors. We've heard some really good stories of community members helping other community members, and just want to thank you all for that. I also want to thank our public safety, public works, and facility personnel for all their work responding to calls and opening up the roadways. I would also like to just take this opportunity to thank people that many people may not remember. You see the police officers, you see the firefighters, but there's a team behind them communicating with them to dispatch them to the proper locations, and that's our public safety communication team or our dispatchers. We're fielding hundreds of calls, deploying emergency personnel throughout this entire event. and making sure that those roads, taking that data regarding which roads are closed, which roads have no power, and communicating that to our Eversource liaisons. So again, I want to thank you for that. As far as another update, we want to just talk about recycling. We were going to have our assistant DPW director on to share with the board and the residents some information regarding some recycling contamination that's been reported. Unfortunately, he is still out dealing with the power issues. Again, communicating with Eversource and to make sure that they get the powers restored as quickly as possible. But we do have some information. Our contamination rate for the last couple of years has been 9%, which is phenomenal. Unfortunately, especially when you compare it to other communities, unfortunately, recent audits have shown a reflection, a huge increase. So we are now up to 17% of a contamination rate. If we don't correct this, the next audit that will be conducted in approximately 6 months, the town could be facing some type of monthly contamination charge. So I know we know our residents are very mindful of recycling. Our assistant DPW director, Brendan Ryan, has put together a little PSA to try to help residents identify. Some people are a little confused what can be recycled, what can't. So I'm going to ask Charlotte if you could run that PSA for us right now.
Hello, Westwood residents. I'm Brendan Ryan with the Department of Public Works, here to educate you on what is recyclable and what is not. So each resident in town has either a blue top lid, which we have here, or a green top lid. The recycling container is a 95-gallon container. The trash container is a smaller container. So that's the two differences of the recycling and the trash. First, we'll start off with what is recyclable. Cardboard. Break this down to allow for adequate space in your container for each bi-weekly pickup. Glass jars, cardboard boxes, containers, plastic water bottles, other bottles similar to juices, cleaned out right in the recycle can. Newspaper. One thing that seems to be a problem at the facility is in the house, they put their recycling into a trash bag. This should be emptied into the container. And then this has to go into the trash. Okay, now moving over to the trash stream. Trash stream, I always say, when in doubt, throw it out. Coffee cups, bottle caps. This is a very problematic item that get trapped in the machines for the processing at the plant. These should be going into the trash. Hangers. See a lot of this time of year during the holiday season. Holiday lights, they do go in the trash stream. This happens to be one of the largest contaminants that hits the recycling stream. Plastic bags from your grocery stores, other stores that you purchase items in. This is a huge problem that needs to be corrected. So trash bags, plastic bags into the trash. Cords, electronics, they should be taken to our recycling day, but when in doubt, throw it out. These Ziploc bags, packaging that has cups, etc. This is not recyclable. This should go into the trash. One of the largest offenders that we are seeing, which I am a little boggled with, is people throw paint cans into the recycling container. This is an absolute no-no. This can, when it's dried, can go into the trash. It does not belong in the recycling. I urge each and every one of you to help out on this request. Our contamination rate has now grown from 9% to 17%. If we don't correct this, we will then be charged a contamination rate. This will directly impact our budget. We urge you to please help us in making sure recycling goes in the recycling and trash goes in the trash. Thank you for doing your part in leveling out the contamination rate. We need your support. Please do the right thing, and let's get Westwood back on top.
So, Madam Chair, that PSA, first I want to thank Westwood Media Center and Charlotte specifically for helping the recording of that PSA. That's also on the town's website. And again, this is something that if any resident has any questions, If you visit our Public Works recycling website, you'll find resources that can ensure your household is doing their part to lower the contamination rate. And again, we do certainly thank all the residents for all their support. And that is my update, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was a very well done PSA. Thank you, Westwood Media Center and Brendan and the DPW. The board will now be going into executive session to discuss one issue pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations for non-union personnel, discussion of which would have a detrimental effect on the position of the governing body if the discussion were in open session. The board will be returning to open session at approximately 6:20 p.m. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
You're on mute.
You're on, Joe.
Second.
Roll call, Joe,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you. We are now back in open session. Chris, I believe you had a couple of additional items on your administrator's report.
Yes, thank you. So this will be Town Administrator Report Part 2. Holiday cardboard only dumpster will be at 50 Carby Street. The dates will be December 26th, 27th, 28th, and 29th from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and January 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Residents can dispose of cardboard only. No trash, wrapping paper, twist ties, peanuts, or styrofoam will be accepted. And this will be in a contaminated dumpster. So we don't want to contaminate the dumpster, as we were just talking about our recycling rate. So again, it's cardboard only. And then also another update from DPW. Christmas tree pickup will be between January 2nd and January 12th of 2024. Please place your Christmas trees at your curbside by 7 a.m. on your regular scheduled collection date. All trees must be free of plastic bags, stands, ornaments, hooks, tinsel, and other materials to be accepted by the collection team. And now I believe I've completed my town administrator. Oh, no, one more update. I'm sorry. I also want to, we talked about the PSA that DPW did for our recycling. Our chair also did a PSA for Article 1 to provide residents with a video walkthrough of Fire Station 1. It's a very good PSA. I want to again thank Westwood Media Center for their support in recording that and helping us to get that out there. But I think it's on our website. It's also on the Westwood Media Center YouTube channel. I would encourage residents to, if they haven't seen it, if they have an opportunity to watch that, it'll give them, again, a visual of some of the current conditions in Fire Station 1. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you for that. That was very nicely done.
Well, thank you, Chris. And again, thank you to Westwood Media Center. Chris or Tish, could you direct folks to where they could find that on the town website?
Your PSA, it's on the news section of the town website, and it's also under the annual town meeting, special town meeting section of the town website. So it's in 2 locations. So it's on the front page on the news section and also on the annual town meeting, special town meeting web page.
Excellent. Thank you, Tish. With that, we will move into scheduled action, the first of which is to approve the date of May 19, 2024 for the 2024 Pan Mass Challenge Kids Ride. And with us, we have Nancy James, who is the PMC Kids Ride Coordinator. Welcome, Ms. James, and thank you for all of your work on this. I understand this is the 15th annual ride planned to be held at Martha Jones. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
No, first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, for having me. I just briefly want to thank the town. It's just such a great event. We're really blessed to have it in our town. It really brings the community together. The only change, for those of you who may remember, we historically had a 1 mile route, a 5 mile, and then a 10. We shortened it to just the 1 mile route this year, it's easier to patrol from a volunteer perspective. But no other changes. We're continuing to have just a tot loop on the Martha Jones basketball court. That's just a area for kids on, who aren't comfortable riding that 1 mile course. So we're just excited to be back for year number 15.
That's great. That's terrific. Thank you for your work. Any questions or comments, Rob or Joe?
It's a great time. Enjoyed it thoroughly, Nancy.
I'm so glad you were there. Thank you.
I will.
And it's just the only just quick thing that I'll say is these kids really get it. And they get why they're riding. And we had a number of families where the kids were riding for their parents. So it was pretty meaningful. And one dad in particular said to me, he's just trying to get as many memories as he can. And he's grateful for the work at, that Dana-Farber does. He's being treated there. So it's a meaningful event.
Thank you for that. I will entertain a motion.
I move the select board approve the 15th annual Pan Mass Challenge Kid Ride to be held on Sunday, May 19th, 2024, pending approval from the school department and obtaining the appropriate permits from town administrator's office, board of health, and building department.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Nancy, thank you again, and thank you to all of the volunteers who make this event so successful every year.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much. Happy holidays all.
Same to you. Our next item, it pertains to a regulatory agreement for 436 Washington Street. And with us, we have Nora Loughnane, our Community and Economic Development Director. We also have Amanda Wolf, our Housing and Land Use Planner, and Stephen David as well. Welcome, all of you. I'll turn this over to Nora or Amanda to lead us through this, please.
Thanks. Amanda has done most of the work on this, so probably best for her to take it from here.
Great.
All right. I'm frozen. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. Sorry, my video's delayed. So I've been working with Stephen David, who's the developer and owner of 436 Washington Street, on his local action unit application for 5 affordable 1-bedroom apartments on Washington Street. And the Housing Partnership has voted to have their chair endorse this application and recommended that the select board, if they are inclined, also vote to endorse it. Once we have signatures, we'll be able to send it to EOHLC for 5 additional units to be listed on our subsidized housing inventory.
Thank you for that very succinct summary. Amanda, Mr. David, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Madam Chairwoman. I think I've given everything I can, and I'm looking forward to beginning the project as soon as I can.
Wonderful. Let me turn it to my colleagues for any questions or comments you may have.
Only question I have, Amanda, the Office of ELOC, HOC, they're all good with everything as proposed?
Yeah, so they'll review it to make sure, but we've done it in line with how we've submitted past applications, and they've been responsive to our questions along the process, so we don't expect any issues with it.
Great, thank you.
No questions on my end, Marianne. Nice work, Amanda. Steve.
Thank you.
Yes, nice work to all of you. This is good. If there are no other questions or comments, I will entertain a motion.
I move the select board to authorize our chair to sign the application for 436 Washington Street and submit that application to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, EOHLC, for approval and further endorsement.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice holiday.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Madam
Amanda.
Chair,
Bye.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just a brief update. Just got an update from our Eversource liaison. We had around 5 o'clock, we had approximately 200 homes without power. Now we're down to 8. And we're expecting those 8 to be powered by 11 p.m. this evening is what I'm being told.
Very good news. Thank you, Chris. Okay, moving on our agenda. Next, we have a request to approve the deed for the Obed Baker House. And with us is Special Town Council Dan Bailey. Good evening.
Good
And thank you
evening,
for being here.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I think that this is a day that many in town have long wanted. So we have a closing scheduled for tomorrow on the Obed Baker house, which includes 2 parcels of land at 909 and 909R High Street. The reason I am here is that the board needs to vote to, we have town meeting approval to sell the property. But the board needs to vote to approve the deed, and just as importantly, 2 of the board members need to find their way to town hall in the morning and sign the deed, because I'm supposed to deliver it to the buyer's attorney by 10 a.m. And you will need to have your signatures notarized. Dottie Powers is aware of all of that. Pat has been coordinating with me on this over the course of the week. So there's really not that much. As I said, this was all approved at the 2022 annual town meeting. There was an RFP published a couple of years ago. Todd Sullivan Construction was awarded the proposal. The town and Todd have been working on permits and approvals for some time, and we're ready to close it. So, I had in your package, you've got a proposed motion. After consulting with Pat, we've got a slight change to that. So if you want me to read it, I'd be happy to do so.
Please, why don't we hear your motion, and then we'll have any further discussion, but we'll make a note of what changes need to be made.
Okay. The proposed motion is to vote to 1, approve the deed, 2, authorize Christopher Coleman, town administrator, to execute a lease back of a portion of 909 High Street, subject to review and approval of the lease terms by town council. And 3, to authorize Daniel Bailey, special town council, to deliver the deed and to execute other customary closing documents as necessary to close the sale of the property. Now, the change there is I substituted myself for town council Ahern on the execute other customary closing documents after consulting with him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Rob, Joe, any questions or concerns? This day has been long in coming.
No questions from my end.
Right. So as such, I would move that the board move the motion as read by Mr. Bailey.
Second.
Roll call. Joe.
Aye.
Rob.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, Dan, for all of your work on this.
Thank you. And Chris, assuming all goes well, I'll be bringing a check to town hall for you tomorrow.
You don't hear that often from an attorney, so thank you, Dan.
I'm on my cell phone all morning if you need me.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to do it. It's not too often I get to bring a check to a client. So,
and we'll be there to sign, Dan. Don't worry.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much. All right, next up on our agenda is an update from the Westwood Land Trust regarding the Prout Farm at 665 Clapboardtree Street. I see we have Karen Manor-Metzel from the Land Trust with us. Hi, good evening, Karen.
Good evening.
Are we waiting on anyone else?
It should be Nancy Dempsey and Mark Cooperman.
Okay.
Now we're a few minutes early this time. That was happy news with the Obed Baker house.
Yes, indeed. Well, we will give this a minute. I see Mark Cooperman is coming in now.
I believe I've just been allowed in.
Great.
Here we go.
There's
You are
Mark.
here. Welcome, Mr. Cooperman.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board.
Good evening. Perhaps I could just give my brief introduction to this, and hopefully, do we see Nancy coming in, Tish?
I do not see Nancy. I'll keep watching.
Okay. Well, perhaps we can just start this just to orient folks. We're talking about the Prout Farm at 665 Clapboardtree Street. The board is not taking any action on this matter tonight, other than to receive this update from the Westwood Land Trust and to ask any questions the board may have about it. By way of brief background, the Prout Farm consists of approximately 29 acres that were preserved with a conservation restriction in 2000, with 23 acres owned by the town. This town land is in the custody, care, and control of the Conservation Commission, and the Westwood Land Trust is the holder of the conservation restriction, or CR. At our meeting on October 23rd, 2023, the select board discussed an inquiry to lease the land for farming, which is a permitted use under the CR. At that time, the Westwood Land Trust reported it had secured a consultant to perform a natural resource assessment of the land, and we asked the Land Trust to provide that report and return to this meeting for discussion. And with that, I want to welcome Karen and Mr. Cooperman, and we'll certainly allow Ms. Dempsey in the meeting when she arrives, and I'll turn it over to you for an update. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chairman and other select board members. I'm Karen Manor, President of Westwood Land Trust. I've been a Westwood resident for 25 years and involved with Westwood Land Trust for over 20 now. I just did want to give a little more background on this process with where we've gone so far regarding the request to provide for agriculture on the farm. It was in 2022, the beans came to Westwood Land Trust, like late summer, early fall, asking for permission to farm. And the board made some phone calls, inquired with experts, but it was all just phone conversations. And we also knew that there are very few meadows in town. So we did decline the beans request at that time and informed the town as such. As you mentioned, the town is the owner of the property. But as the Land Trust Board, we felt we needed to better understand our meadow at 665 Clapboardtree Street, and informed the beans in the town that we really should pursue a meadow management plan. We began investigating that in August and September of this year. With the earlier part of the year, we were really focused on Hale education and trying to preserve that property. So we started contacting experts and reached out to find consultants that we could perform a review for us of the property. And fortunately, we did get connected with Mark Cooperman, who's with us this evening. He has been on site. We hired him to do, originally we hired him to, we didn't hire him, we requested for him to do a full year review, which is the most appropriate type of review. So you understand the conditions of the property throughout a full year. So you understand what types of wildlife utilize the property. But given the request from the select board to try to come back with some information more quickly, we requested Mark to just do a snapshot. So we did go on site with Mark, and this is part of our due diligence that we went on site with him. The first visit, then he brought his team on site, and he delivered a preliminary report to us early December. The board was able to meet with him last week. It was really enlightening enlightening isn't the right word. He really educated us on what we do have there on that property and the value of meadows. In addition to just the value of the meadows, he really helped us learn more about what would it take if we were to lose this meadow, convert it to something else. What would the time and cost be for that? So at this point, I'd like to have Mark share some of those highlights that we've discussed, and he's really an expert, and I really appreciate his time so far.
Hey, I'm on.
Mark,
Thank you
you're
very
on.
much for that introduction, Karen,
Yeah.
and the great overview of how we got here. So I will pick up from there. Good evening, members of the board, Madam Chair. Again, what I'd like to do is just give you kind of a synopsis of our preliminary ecological assessment that we had done for the meadow. As Karen has mentioned, obviously, yes, we had timing was later in the season. We had a snapshot opportunity to do it. So that's what we've done up to this point. I'll conclude by talking about next steps moving forward after we get through the science. So the first thing, obviously, we visited the site. First visit, I visited it myself with Karen. And we had a great walk, looked around, also looked at the surrounding areas, the forested wetland areas, the stream, to get some good landscape context for the property itself. But the focus here is the meadow. We identified through GIS and additional follow-up field work, we identified the meadow to be approximately 9.2 plus or minus acres of the property. And then we further categorized the meadow into 3 communities based on our observations this time of year right now. And that was a general typical upland meadow, in addition to a wet meadow, which had clear indicator species of a wet meadow. And then also these areas that we call shrub dominant, where the woody plants, the shrubby dogwoods, are really taking over and tend to dominate. Those all come in at various acreage, respectively. The general upland meadow, 5.4 acres. The wet meadow, about 1.4, and the shrub dominant, about 2.4. And those numbers, obviously, it's an estimate with GIS at this point. Within each of those, we looked, as closely as we could this time of year without having fauna activity. So these surveys were obviously focused primarily on vegetative community characteristics. We looked within each of them, described them in this preliminary report, and found those particular plants, whether it be the general or the wet meadow or the shrub dominant area, found those particular plant species that we would normally characterize that type of meadow with. And what we found in all 3 of the areas is there's that expected sort of level of diversity that we find in meadows. As Karen has already mentioned, I think, for any of us involved with land use, we know that one of the less common areas now for decades around here happen to be grasslands, often referred to as grasslands, or meadows, meadow communities. At approximately 10 acres, it's a very decent sized meadow for the area, and certainly one of those only those around. We tend to have a lot of forested area around here, a lot of wet forested area, or landscape development area. So in these initial surveys, we definitely identified a lot of the expected players, particularly with regard to what we call the grasses and the forbs, which comprise a meadow. And the grasses are the ground cover layer in a lot of cases. And then the forbs would be the flowering plants. And the forbs are what really constitute the diversity in a meadow for pollinators that obviously become prey for bird species, things like that, prey for other insects, spiders, host plants from butterflies and moths. And we found a lot of the very typical players that we see as key indicators of a good, stable, established meadow and the diversity associated with that. On a side note, as an ecologist, so meadows in studies historically are considered around here, until you get to the tropics, the most diverse communities because of that varied vegetative structure you get, both in not just in species, but in strata. So you've got that ground layer, you've got that herbaceous cover, you've got that middle layer, you've got that taller layer, and you've got the shrub layer in some areas. So you've got an abundance of different cover, food source, breeding plants, things like that, host plants, nectar, all the different things that we associate with flowers and or grasses for seeds. So we looked at those communities, we described them further for our clients, Westwood Land Trust, in the report, broke it out in a little more detail with regard to, you know, some examples of which ones provide what services for what species. We obviously, given the time of year, as Karen had mentioned, we weren't able to do grassland bird studies or anything like that because those bird species would be gone by now for the most part. So that would be something that would have to be done at a later date. But certainly there are characteristics there that would suggest it's very capable of supporting some of the grassland bird species. The meadow is managed fairly appropriately, from my understanding to date. We're working with Karen and her team to even possibly fine tune that a little bit moving forward. But as we understand it right now, it's historically, as most meadows are, it's mowed in the early to mid fall. We held off a little bit this year so that we could get out there and do our work. But I think it's managed fairly typically, as we often even recommend for some of our clients. There are some tweaks, I think, which can be done with regard to the woody plant material and such, but for the most part, it's managed fairly typically to ensure that it stays this diverse kind of herbaceous meadow community. The other thing we really kind of learned while visiting the site, in particular after the second visit and looking at it a little more closely, and that is there's definitely a component of a wet meadow that follows along the back border. We're adjacent to the woodland, wetland, and stream environment. And that wet meadow, some of which even shows up on the Mass GIS layer as an identified wetland resource, actually extends further. The water levels are probably a little higher this year. The plant characteristics are there. I suspect the soils are there. The hydric soils are there. So one of the things that came to my attention that I brought to my clients was, well, wait a minute, aside from looking at alternative practices for the meadow farming, et cetera, one thing that may be important to understand out here is there's a component of this piece of the property that may be jurisdictional under the Wetlands Protection Act. And not only because of the wet meadow itself extending into the meadow proper, but also the buffers associated with the bordering vegetated wetland within the woodland, in addition to the stream, which would fall under the perennial stream, which would fall under the Riverfront Act and provide a 200-foot offset into the meadow. We did not, to be clear, right now, we have not been engaged or done a formal wetland delineation. We'll talk about that at the end as we move forward towards next steps. But certainly we do a lot of this work. And very preliminarily, we mapped it out as the wet meadow pretty much extending along the sort of western and southern border for varying distances. But that back corner of the meadow is definitely wet, and it probably even extends a little further if you really get into the soils. So we looked at that, and we looked at it, and again, in the context of the adjacent communities in the woodland. And then we mapped out to get some estimate of the different types of meadows. We mapped out approximate polygons for those, and again, characterized them. The other important topic that sort of came up when meeting with our clients was, as we look at alternative future uses for this, what would it take to restore a meadow if, for example, if it were farmed for a period of time? And I think this is what Karen was sort of referring to. Is this is something I think nobody really talked about. We often don't talk about. We happen to do a lot. One of our specialties is restoration work, so we actually do a lot of planned restoration work. And I explained to Karen and the rest of the members of the trust, one of the most difficult communities we do are meadows. They, no matter how much money, materials, and effort you throw at it, you cannot, despite what's marketed to you and all the great sites that promote ecological landscaping, you cannot put a meadow in a can and throw it down and turn it into a meadow. It doesn't happen. One of the bigger challenges in all these suburban areas that we all occupy now is that once you open up the soil, so to speak, whether it's for farming or for any other reason, development, we're surrounded by a host of non-native invasive plants that are much more aggressive than most of these natives. So when we open bare soil to that, what we're usually battling with are undesirable plants for a few years of management in order to establish. That coupled with the fact that while we do create meadows all the time, it takes a significant amount of money, both in effort, seed costs, and management those first 3 to 5 years, and also quite often the necessity for using spot treating with herbicides, things like that, to ensure that we shift the ecological palette here to what we've desired with our presumably very expensive seed mixes. We do it other ways too. We use plugs and even small shrubs in some cases. And so I tried to, as Karen mentioned, I tried to educate them as their consultant as to, okay, what would we be looking at if some portion thereof were to, go into an alternate use for a while and then get it back. And I think one of the things that struck me was, when I think of sort of sustainable farming, is this great idea of rotating. But I think I started to go through the numbers in my experience with the meadows that we've done and things like that, is that you can't even do this on a 5-year rotation, because by year 5, you'd barely just be getting the meadow back again. And then if it's going back to farming, for example, you're never getting an established meadow like this, which is decades and decades old, with that extensive, a big part of it is that root system that's under there, the soils, etc. So we went into a little bit of that, and some logistics, and even projected costs, and they vary depending on how intensive you want to get with the initial planting and establishment of the meadow. But the long short of it is, as I always tell my clients that we're doing this for, meadows are contrary to popular belief and even some of the marketing. To do a sizable meadow correctly, they're very expensive and very time consuming and very much hands-on. They're not hands-off for the first 3 to 5 years.
Mark,
if I could just interject, I do see that there's a comment in the chat. If you do have a comment at any time tonight, please include your address. We can't read it without an address. But perhaps we could hear about next steps and where the trust is going.
Mark, this is where I was going to stop. As I was seeing the question popping up, is we're actually going to, I appreciated the introduction you had, Marianne, but with the town and then the land trust, but I wanted, Nancy Dempsey is an attorney on our board, and she's been with the land trust a long time. She has some information to make sure that, like this on the meadow, we were setting clear on what the benefits are of the meadow, but we also want to make sure it's very well established and clear to everyone in town, the role of the conservation restriction and the role of the land trust. And I see that one question, this will be helpful, and I think will help answer some of the questions you might be getting to. So Nancy, could, if I may, Madam Chairman, can we have, is that permissible to you?
Sure.
And I just wanted, before I do that briefly, if Mark, you had given us some numbers when you presented to us last week of a pretty high number per acre to restore the meadow, and I think that's important for people to hear. Can you just say that quickly?
Sure. Yes, I think the range I sort of gave you was, depending on the intensity, we often use a value of around 20 to 40, 50,000 an acre for a quote unquote diverse, showy meadow. Now, what drives that number very simply is, one, what's required to prepare it. 2, how are we starting? Are we starting purely with seed? And if so, what species? Some of these seed mixes are, hundreds and hundreds of dollars an ounce, okay, let alone pound. And lastly, sometimes one way to overcome those undesirable aggressive non-natives that we know are in the area. And by the way, I didn't elaborate, I apologize. We've identified some out here. There's glossy buckthorn, there's multiflora rose, there's a number of them out there. I think we saw some loosestrife in the wet area, some purple loosestrife. So we know they're there. So one way we overcome that sometimes is aggressively establishing certain portions with actual plants, actual potted plants or plugs. And that gets a lot more expensive, both in the cost and in the effort to get them in there.
Can I just interject, because as I understood it, no report has been given to us. So I thought tonight we'd be getting an update on where the land trust is going from here in terms of process. So I think we're interested in hearing that. We're at a loss without the report itself that you're referring to, the preliminary report. So it's a bit hard for us to assess that, but I think the board is interested in an update in terms of what the process will be going forward. So
I'll
thank-
wrap up if you'd like with
But
that.
let's have, Nancy's going to speak to the process first.
Sure.
Well,
Great.
What
guess-
controls the entire process of this as being having land under conservation?
Right, and I'm sorry to be late to the meeting. I thought we were starting around 6:45. So Nancy Dempsey, I'm past president of the Land Trust, current vice president, been involved with it for 20 years. And I've done 11 of the 12 conservation restrictions, stewarded them through before the Board of Selectmen and the Concom and so forth. So anyway, we did hire, because of the keen interest in this, we hired legal counsel just to make sure we clearly understood what our duties were and what our rights were as a landholder under the terms of this conservation restriction. And first of all, I just want to make sure, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the town. Why is the land trust taking so long? Why can't they just allow farming? I think everyone needs to understand that we have fiduciary duties as a board to first and foremost protect the conservation of each and every property that's under a conservation restriction. And that's our duty. And as much as we love farming, I grew up on a farm myself. Karen grew up next to a farm. As much as we love farming or any other use that might be possible, our first touchstone is what are the conservation purposes being served. So I hope people will understand and respect that as we go through this process and gather the information we need to reach a conclusion. And so according to our counsel, Ken Berman, I'm just going to read a few points he raised about how do the ownership rights work with a conservation easement. And the land trust is the holder of the restrictive easement, which means that it has a dominant estate, a dominant property interest in the conservation easement on Clapboardtree Meadow. The town holds a subservient estate. That means that the land trust rights in land are paramount to the town's rights. Under the terms of the conservation restriction, no one has a right to use the land for agricultural purposes without the land trust's consent. The conservation restriction says in Part 3, Section B, that certain listed uses are permitted, but only if such acts and uses do not materially impair the purpose of this conservation restriction or other significant conservation interests. So one thing that's important for everyone to understand, we're doing our due diligence as a land trust to understand what we have, and that's what Mark's been involved with. And his report was a preliminary report, not a final report. It's not something that we're going to publish right now because we have more information to gather. A third of this property is wet. So we're just not there yet, but we are working hard and we understand everyone's anxious to understand what can be done. And we want to be as helpful as possible. We really do, but we're working within our duty and we want to make sure we talk to the experts. I think as a board, we had no idea until we talked to Mark about the meadow. No idea how complicated a meadow is, how hard it is to replicate it, how much diversity is there. So we're all learning, and I hope you will respect and understand that. So, one other point, many people have pointed out that paragraph 9 in the conservation restriction says that agricultural uses are permitted, but according to our lawyer, they're only permitted with prior approval of the grantee. The grantee is a land trust. So the decision does fall on the land trust. And any change in the use, any agricultural use on the meadow would require a conservation management plan or other standards that the land trust would establish. Okay, that's a land trust job. It's not the town's job to establish that. And finally, the fact that there's language in the conservation restriction that talks about agriculture that was not put in there. I talked to the McFarlands about this. I didn't draft this conservation restriction. It wasn't put in there because it was intended that this land be farmed. The land was a meadow when the conservation restriction went on. It continues to be a meadow, but a good conservation restriction should have flexibility built into it. And it was meant to provide, to benefit the land trust by giving the land trust the flexibility to allow that use if the land trust thought the circumstances warranted it, and if the land trust can find that it's not going to be harmful to the conservation purposes of that protected land. So just so that's clear, kind of what are the roles and why are we doing all this due diligence, and why can't we just give you a quick answer? That's why we're doing our job.
Okay, and as far as the further work that the land trust is planning to do, when do you intend to report out on that?
Well, I just like to elaborate a bit. We've asked Mark to tell us, we want to be helpful. So we've asked Mark to tell us all the kinds of things that could happen in that meadow, including potential farming in certain areas that wouldn't harm the conservation purposes. So we are spending land trust resources to try to be as open as possible to helping the farm. And so the two main parts of that, and Mark can answer the timing more, but one is we need to understand where the wetlands are and get those flagged on this property. And there is a stream as part of the conservation land that's downhill from the meadow. And the second thing is the meadow management plan, which would tell us all the kinds of things that could happen in a meadow that would be consistent with protecting the meadow or that land. So Mark, can you answer the sort of timing?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Nancy. So I think, so we recently decided that we're going to push forward. We are going to try and get the wetland delineation and survey work done as soon as possible. As many board members often realize, that sometimes winter delineations are more difficult, but I think if the weather holds out, this is one that we can get accomplished, and then we'll just be waiting on survey to put that into an existing conditions plan for us in the context of the meadow, so we can have an accurate representation, as Nancy mentioned, as to where the resources are, because and Nancy did a great job of emphasizing this at the end of the day, under the Wetlands Protection Act and as a conservation organization, I think it's our responsibility to, at a minimum, outline everything and identify what we have, with regard to the performance standards and the buffers and protecting the buffers. Secondly, I think from that, we realized we could put together a much more educated sort of proposed meadow management plan, that may include various farming activities. But I think a big part of that is what we all realized is identifying these resource area boundaries to start, and then looking at what we've been able to do in this snapshot of time in early November for now. And then lastly, if we needed to, the following step would be to obviously get out there and do some biological surveys during the active season, looking at various diversity studies and what's using it, whether it be grassland birds and various insects and such. But at a minimum right now, the two primary next steps are wetland resource area evaluation and delineation. And from there, putting together some sort of preliminary proposed future meadow management plan.
What is a realistic timeline for completing that work?
I'm going to be realistic. If we're fortunate enough to be able to get the delineation done in several weeks, we're at the mercy of the surveyors, which these days is typically a couple of months. So I'm going to say there's 3 months, and then some report preparation and planning and graphics, possibly 4 months, 3 to 4 months plus.
So, Madam Chairman, if I may.
Sure.
So on the call tonight, or on the Zoom call tonight, is Karen Catrone Skinner, our conservation agent, who is an expert at marking out wetlands. And she knows the town like she knows the back of her hand. I would encourage you to work with her on on delineating the wetlands in that particular area. She has vast experience with the various streams and wetlands in town, and she can be a valuable resource that can help you expedite that process.
Thank you,
Uh,
Pat.
thank you.
If I may. So again, I just want to be clear, we are taking no action on this tonight. This is simply an update that we are receiving from the land trust. So I do want to open it up. We need to move forward with our agenda, but I do want to open it up to my colleagues for any questions or comments you may have at this point. I see both of your hands are raised. I'll go with Rob and Joe moving left to right on my screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions. Karen, you spoke earlier about the beans that approached you in 2022 and that the land trust had been focused more on the preservation of Hale and the CR on that front. I guess, why is everything proceeding in a linear fashion? Why could this not have proceeded in a parallel fashion, given that Mark is an external consultant? I'm sure he could have done all of his work in parallel with all of the pursuits that you were undertaking with respect to Hale, because this feels like it's yet another delay in having this, substantive conversation. And then secondly, when you were before us in October, it was my understanding that the report would be ready in mid-November. Never was it described as a preliminary report. So I feel at a significant disadvantage sitting here not having something in advance of our meeting to be able to have a real meaty discussion about.
Do you want me to answer that, Karen, or?
No, last year that, we gave a response as a land trust, and the people who requested farming pursued, they've requested, we wouldn't legally have to change the use. It's a good use of property, use of of conservation land right now. So when we collected subjective information, then we came to a decision. And when we were asked to pursue it further, the town as the owner did not ask us to pursue this further at that time. Because we like farming, we wanted, and we liked the Bean family, we wanted to be cooperative and said that we would pursue this further. We had not set a timeline with them at all. And we are, as the land trust, we are using our financial resources to pursue this because we know it's our responsibility to
Understood. As the grantee of the CR, totally get that.
If we had the landowner asking us, it might have been different. As like now, we've started going as the landowner. When you started asking, what could we do here? Then we felt it was of higher priority, and the landowner was requesting us to make this a higher priority. Nancy, was something you wanted to add to that?
No.
And with respect
Does
to
that answer your question, Rob?
Yes, to a degree. And then Nancy, you had mentioned the language that's in the current CR, but it was known at the time that the CR was drafted that this was a meadow. So there would not have been any reason to include agricultural use if it was known that that would never be a better use than the meadow. So I'm just curious as to why language would be included that would never be contemplated.
There's all kinds of, I'm an estate planning attorney for my day job. There's tons of boilerplate in the back of a will, for example, that people don't contemplate using, that's in there. Conservation restrictions are done based on a model form that the state puts out. So they like to see conservation easement forms that match what they're used to. So there are a lot of reasons why you would see agricultural permitted uses, or there's also, permitted, blanking on the word, historic research or other uses that you'll see in a conservation restriction that weren't intentionally put in there. So it's in there. for flexibility. It's not in there because it was affirmatively added with the intention that this would be farmed.
Okay, if I could.
Rob, you're on mute.
My final question before turning it over to Joe is, Mark, you spoke about, if the meadow were turned over every so many years, like you used 5 years, and that it would take about 5 years for the meadow to reestablish. So if this was something that could be utilized for farming, could we not, and this is as much for Nancy as well as you, could we not, through conditions of the lease, ensure that when and if the farming was to cease, that the original condition of the meadow could be restored and have that be, conditions of a lease? I feel like there are so many things that we have as challenges to overcome in this community, that this is one that feels like it could be a layup, but for, it's being,
So, all right, so Rob, let's think about this from a practical standpoint. Let's say you have to exclude roughly a third of the 9 acres to protect the wetlands. Then you have to probably have some kind of a buffer. I don't mean to jump ahead to what Mark's going to decide. Then you have, if you're being a prudent steward, I think the land trust would have some kind of a guarantee to cover the anticipated costs of restoring the meadows, some sort of like a surety, a bond or something, because it shouldn't be on the land trust nickel to spend thousands of dollars to get a meadow restored there and keep all the invasives out. So to some extent, some of that would become, you have to think about the practicalities of it.
yeah, I understand. I guess part of what I'm questioning, and go ahead, Mark.
Well, let me finish that, if you don't mind, Rob. Just finish the sort of practical part of it to answer your question. So I picked the 5 year as a very random example, thinking both as an ecologist and both as agriculture. That being said, I want to be clear that 5 year example I picked, I was using because that's often a point at which where we begin to see stability. A meadow like we're looking out at now, currently, that takes decades to get to that ecological state. So when I say 5 years, 5 years is the point at which we're feeling like maybe, for example, that intensive initial management is starting to ease up a little bit. We're more into the mowing, but it's by no means a mature meadow. All right. And I think that's where we're where we look at the future, when we're looking at the future meadow management plan, to your question as a layup, yes, we're trying to look and see where it's practical to say, with some sort of a surety or a bond, if at all practical, can any given portion be utilized and brought back to a meadow in a period in which the land trust feels they are in fact preserving the role of the CR. And I don't have the answer to that right now, but I can tell you that well-established, stable meadows are a decade or so older.
But I just like to say, I'm on a farm board. I'm on the board around the Bend farm. And my family does a cranberry farming. They've augmented their income by doing events and things at the farm. And so one of our charges to Mark, and this is all happening quickly, is, Mark, what could be done farming wise? Could there be mushroom cultivation? Could there be bee cultivation? Could they use the meadow to expand the pumpkin sales in the fall? Could they use it to expand the Christmas tree sales? Just thinking outside of the box about ways to use that space and that view, hay rides, hiking trails, that don't necessarily mean tearing up. The thing about the meadow is like this well-established, what I understand from Mark, this well-established footing, right? That's so hard to get back. So maybe there's a bunch of other things that would be extremely helpful to the bean farm that the meadow could help with.
Joe,
So I'm definitely sympathetic.
Joe, I want to give you a chance to ask your question or make your comment. I do want to point out we've spent nearly 45 minutes on this item and we do have other agenda items. So I would like to move this forward. Again, this is an update tonight. We are not taking any action tonight. So Joe, I want to give this to you.
Thanks, Marianne. I just have 3 quick questions. And Mark, I think there's a good helicopter view of what's happening there. The wetland bogs and meadows do fall under jurisdictional. I'm happy you pointed out the perennial stream. Before the land trust goes down the road of significant spending, could you not, well, before that, in your helicopter view, did you see any signs of vernal pools or endangered species?
I don't believe I believe we did a quick NHESP check. I do not believe it's mapped under the state priority habitat layer. I do want to double check it on a couple of versions. And then firstly, to answer the vernal pool, not within the meadow, but we have not explored enough of the woodland, as that was not the scope here. We've not explored enough of the remaining portion of the property to identify if any portion of that bordering vegetated wetland, for example, is functioning as a vernal pool.
Great segue. So with that in mind, and to save the land trust some money, could you not just do a 200-foot offset from that perennial stream and then do your wetland flaggings there? And then could not the upland meadow be farmed?
So yes, except that the portion of the meadow that we're describing preliminarily as wet meadow, in a proper delineation, as we also are wetland scientists, this is what we do, that portion of the meadow would flag out as wetland resource. So that wetland resource line may actually be in the meadow. In other words, and if like flags or stakes, for example, not hanging on a shrub as we often do in a woodland situation. So we need to kind of find that line in the meadow itself, and what we're all calling the meadow, this grassland. We need to find that in addition to those resources, Joe, in the woodland that are going to provide this helicopter offset in two-dimensional space of a buffer. That makes sense.
200 from the stream, but from
the stream,
meadows, the wetland bogs and meadows would be 100-foot, correct?
Correct. But
Thanks,
there's actually a wetland resource within the grassland we're calling the meadow itself.
I'm good, Marianne. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Joe, we do have a couple of questions, comments from residents. One, Amy Thilmont, 52 Woodridge Road. Hi, do the residents of the town vote on the land trust / bean farm? Also, can the residents hear the bean side and the research that was done on their side? It may differ, and I would like to get the whole picture. Amy, I would say to you that, again, we're not making a decision on this tonight. This was simply an update on what the land trust process is. We did have a prior meeting in October that the Beans were present at, and I understand that the Conservation Commission, which has care, custody, and control of the town land that we're speaking about, may be reaching this issue on their agenda. And that's where things stand at the moment. There is a comment from Chuck Bean of 700 Clapboardtree, who says, we have been trying to work with the Westwood Land Trust on this matter since 2016. Karen told me about a year ago that the Westwood Land Trust is honoring the request of the original donor, Duncan McFarland, to maintain it as a meadow. Is that the real reason for the Westwood Land Trust's position? I don't know if anyone from the Land Trust cares to respond to that.
I'll respond. I mean, I just checked in with the McFarlands again on this. They have told us that their intention when they put this conservation restriction on the property, and they wanted to keep the meadow as a meadow, preserve the view. this decision, they want to stay out of it. It's up to the land trust.
Thank you. I'll just turn to my colleagues. Is there anything more?
No.
Joe? Okay, your hand is up. I just want to be sure I'm not missing it this
All right.
time. Anything further, Rob?
I'm good.
All right. Well, we very much appreciate Karen, Nancy, and Mark. Thank you very much for that update. And we'd appreciate a report as soon as you're able to provide us with one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night. Okay. All right. Our next agenda item is the 2024 special town meeting. To actually post the special town meeting warrant, as we've discussed earlier tonight. The special town meeting is scheduled for January 17, 2024 at Westwood High School auditorium. Registration will take place in the auditorium lobby beginning at 5:30 with the official business of the special town meeting to begin at 6:30 p.m. We have discussed the two articles on the warrant several times at our prior meetings. Article 1 pertaining to fire station design and bid document funding, and Article 2 with respect to debt housekeeping. These two articles were presented to the FinCom at their public hearing on December 6th, and the Finance and Warrant Commission unanimously voted to recommend both articles to the special town meeting. So with that, is there any further discussion from my colleagues?
None here.
None here.
Hearing none, I will accept a motion to sign and post the warrant.
I move the select board vote to sign and post the warrant for the January 17th, 2024 special town meeting warrant, and for the warrant to be posted by the constables throughout the town and on the town website.
Second.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well.
Madam Chairman, point of order, if I may.
Please.
So when the meeting was originally scheduled for the 18th, we were due to have a discussion on quorum reduction. Because that meeting got canceled, we've had to give formal notice again, and we will be taking that up at our next meeting on January 8th. And notices will be posted on the town website. I just want to make sure people are clear.
Thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate that.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, I appreciate it. All right, we will now move to new business. And do we have Stephanie with us, Chris, for this?
No, I'll be doing this.
Oh, okay. So our first item of business is the release of third quarter capital. I will turn it over to Chris Coleman.
Thank you. So as the board is aware, but just for those who are watching who may not be aware, at the May 23 annual town meeting, the town approved a capital budget articles with the requirement that the funds be released by the select board. This request is going to be the third quarter request, so the board has already approved the first two quarters. The third quarter totals $118,750, and it's broken down $53,750 on municipal, $65,000 for the schools. On the municipal side, fire turnout gear to purchase and replace, IT and user technology, police radio infrastructure, and under the schools, it's listed as vehicles. So that would be for a total of $118,750. So I would recommend the board the third quarter release of the capital funding totaling $118,750.
Thank you, Chris. Joe or Rob, any questions, comments? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
You're on mute.
Rob.
My apologies. Move the select board approve the release of third quarter fiscal year 24 capital totaling $118,750 to the various departments contingent upon all procurement procedures and checklists being fulfilled.
Second.
Roll call, Joe,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you, Chris. Our next item of business is the Canton Street Project Working Group. And as folks may recall, at our November 13 meeting, 2023, the select board asked for residents interested in serving on a working group to let us know by email. We want to thank the number of residents who volunteered to serve on this working group. We've received input as to the value of keeping that working group small and manageable so that it will be productive. Keeping in mind this will be an open process, open to all to observe pursuant to the open meeting law. And so we are suggesting 6 residents with 3 additional voting members, a member from the select board, a member from the planning board, and a member from the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, along with ex officio members. With respect to the resident members, the select board have nominated the following residents, which I will read the list alphabetically. Ed Driscoll, Grace Doshi, Steve Rafsky, Maureen White, Amy Gold Yale, and Gary Yasalian. With respect to the select board, I propose that I serve in that position. With respect to the planning board, I have spoken with the planning board chair, and she has advised me that she is designated to serve on behalf of the planning board. I have spoken with the chair of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, and he has advised me, Michael Kraft has advised me that Tom McShane has been designated as the Ped Bike representative. With respect to ex officio members from the town, we are suggesting DPW representatives, Todd Korchin and Brendan Ryan, Nora Locknane, our Community and Economic Development Director, Steve Conley from the Police Department, and Steve Lund from the Fire Department. The terms are to be appointed through June 30, 2024, and will be continued as part of the annual appointment reappointment process if needed. Any comments or questions from my colleagues?
Just
None.
one, man.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to speak with each and every one of the members that were the folks who had raised their hand to serve. And, you know, there were a lot of really good perspectives shared with me. So I thought, you know, almost any one of them could have served in an excellent capacity, contributing to this group. So I think we've got an outstanding list here. And I think the combination of that group, the boards that you've talked about, and the ex officio members will make for a very productive round of feedback for the redesign.
Thank you. There's no further discussion. I will entertain a motion.
All right, we'll break this from a point of procedure. We'll make it in 3 phases. I move the select board appoint the following at-large resident members: Ed Driscoll, Grace Doshi, Steve Rafsky, Maureen White, Amy Gold Yale, and Gary Yasalian as members of the Canton Street Project Working Group for terms to end on June 30th, 2024.
Second.
Roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well.
All right, next I move the select board appoint our chair, Mary Ann LeBlanc Cummings, as the select board liaison, and that we also appoint Ellen Rollins Larkin to be the planning board representative. And I'm sorry, Mary Ann, that was
Tom McShane.
Tom McShane as the Ped Bike Safety liaison. for a term to expire on June 30th, 2024.
Second.
Roll call, Joe.
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well.
And finally, for the following to be appointed as ex officio members, Todd Corchin, Brendan Ryan from DPW, Nora Locknane from Department of Economic Development, Assistant Chief Lund from the Fire Department, and Steve Conley as from the Police Department as members of the Canton Street Working Group for the terms to expire, as previously mentioned, June 30th, 2024.
Second.
Roll call, Joe.
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. We want to thank in advance all of the folks who have now been appointed to this important working group. I see that Madam Clerk is with us, and I will note that before the working group can start working, folks have to be sworn in as part of the working group, and they will need to go see Madam Clerk, Dottie Powers, at Town Hall. To do that, Dottie, would you like to say a word about that? You're on mute.
Yes, you can come in anytime during our office hours to be sworn in. And just be sure to try to do that pretty quickly, because we don't want to make any decisions on a public committee without having been sworn in.
Thank you very much, Dottie. So if possible, if folks could do that by the end of the year, preferably. We know it's a busy time, but if you could do that by the end of the year, that would be helpful. We are hoping you will be hearing from Tish Healy, who will be in communication with all of the members, and we will be getting communication to set up a first meeting date, hopefully in early January.
Madam Chair, just there is one question related to this at the bottom of the Q&A.
I did not see that. Thank you very much. Let's see. The question is from Sweta Mipani from 86 Canton Terrace. She said, will you post the names of the committee? I was not able to hear them all. Absolutely, we will. That's a very good suggestion. And Chris, that's something we can get up on the website pretty soon?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. So thank you. Yes, that will be done. Okay, so I think I covered everything there. Did I miss anything, Chris? No? Okay. Very good. Well, thank you again to all for serving, and we look forward to working together on that. Our next item of business is to approve a non-union agreement. Chris, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At your last meeting, I informed the board that Fire Chief John Deckers decided not to seek a renewal of his employment contract, which was set to expire on June 30th. After a conversation with Chief Deckers, including Town Council, recommending to the board that the board authorize myself as the town administrator to sign a separation agreement, a mutually agreed upon separation agreement between the town and John Deckers for the services through June 30th.
Thank you, Chris. Joe or Rob, any questions or comments on that?
None.
No.
I will entertain a motion.
Okay, I move that the board authorize Town Administrator Chris Coleman to sign a contract with non-union personnel, in this case, Chief Deckers.
Second.
Roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well, and I would like to recognize and thank Chief Deckers for his 6 years of service to the Westwood community. Chris?
Yes, thank you. I too, again, would like to thank Chief Deckers for his dedicated years of service to the town of Westwood and the Westwood Fire Department. Madam Chair, also at your last meeting, we also talked about next steps as part of a transition plan. The next step is to identify our interim fire chief. And I'd like to just share with the board, our interim fire chief is going to be Steve Lund. Steve Lund has been serving as our assistant fire chief. well familiar with the department, the members of the fire department, and I look forward to working with Chief Lund in this new capacity.
Thank you, Chris. That brings us to old business with appointments and reappointments of boards and committees. And with us again, Madam Clerk, Dottie Powers, with respect to appointments of election officers. I'll turn this over to you, Dottie.
Yes, thank you. I have, there's a list of people that are going to be appointed. And right now, what we're trying to do is really get prepared for a busy election season coming. So we have appointed, I believe, there's 4 people on your list.
Yes.
There's Ann.
Cronin.
Do you have the names?
Would you like me to read them,
Yeah,
Dottie?
if you could read the names. Yep, please.
Sure. Ann Cronin, 90 Cobley Street. Christopher Devens, 142 Green Hill Road. Gail Sabet, 21 Pine Lane, and Colleen McLean, 28 Greenacre Road.
Yes, and they're all longtime residents of Westwood, and they'll be great additions to our election team.
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions, comments, Rob or Joe? If not, I'll entertain a motion on this.
Sure, I move we appoint Ann Cronin, Christopher Devens, Gail Sabet, and Colleen McLean as election officers for terms to expire on June 30th, 2024.
Second.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, Dottie.
Thank you.
Thank you to our new election officers. It will be a busy year for all of you. With that, that brings us to public and press. Looks like I'm caught up on all of the Q&A. Give this another second, but seeing no other comments, our next meeting is scheduled for January 8, 2024 at 6 p.m. via Zoom. I see no other public comments. So with that, I do want to wish everyone a very happy and healthy new year. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn. You're on mute.
So
I saw your
moved.
lips
Sorry about
moving.
that.
Second.
All right, roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much and good night,
Happy
everyone.
holidays, everybody.
Good
Happy
night.
holidays.